I don't know if it's just humid, but I am spicy today. And I don't mean that like I taste spicy. I am hot, temperature-wise. So we are in the book of Acts, studying from Acts chapter 7. We've been looking at this sermon that Stephen preached to, we're dealing with Sadducees, some Pharisees. The Sanhedrin was involved as well. Primarily, these instances arise because the gospel is being preached, and some of the people that are hearing the sermons don't like the message. We've talked about how the Sadducees, they didn't believe in a resurrection. So hearing the disciples or hearing these apostles come out and say, Jesus Christ, you crucified him, but he's not dead. He's resurrected. It's not just they're out there preaching this Messiah that many do not believe in, but they're also preaching that same guy resurrected from the grave. And so it's doubly angering for them. And we see that response come out. We see that angry, that hateful attitude come out later in just a few verses, as we will be seeing. So last week we left off, I would say, toward the end of the chapter, around verses 30, 34 beyond. We're going to pick up today. No, that's okay. No, I was turning the pages while I was talking, so I'm trying to find the page I was supposed to be on. Yeah, okay, so we're in the right place. Now, dealing with, we've moved past Joseph. We were talking about Joseph for a while. Well, Stephen was talking about Joseph, and the whole point of talking about Joseph is that Joseph ended up being a deliverer for Israel, with the whole famine in Egypt. Joseph was in a way a deliverer for his family when they came to Egypt, and he provided a place of refuge as well as a place for food. Yet another point that Stephen makes is that they rejected Joseph. At least his family did at the very beginning. They rejected him, didn't see him as unique or special or anything of that nature. A similar thing happened to Moses, which we've been looking at. We find Moses, Stephen referring to Moses being born, the situation that had arisen at that time with Pharaoh, trying to trim the population. Moses ends up getting put in a river and then essentially adopted by the house of Pharaoh, by the daughter of Pharaoh. And because of that, he's able to grow, he becomes educated, things of that nature. Well, at a certain point in his life then, he goes out and he's looking at what's going on with the Israelites, and, he wants to be out with his people, so it says, and notices a couple of things, especially with the Egyptian soldier who was very unkind, Moses dealing with that in the way that he wanted. And then the rejection that Moses experienced, which is really where we left off last week, because Moses experienced rejection because of how he responded to that particular situation with the Egyptian soldier. So when Moses, came to the people there and he tried to help them out, explain, this is what you're doing, or why are you acting like this? Their response was, or at least the response of the guilty party was, who made you judge over us? So again, a similar rejection to the kind that Christ experienced when he came to this earth, because he came fulfilling prophecy. He is the Messiah, was the Messiah, and yet many rejected him. Now, we don't want to compare in the sense that we want to look at Moses or any of the martyrs or any of those individuals. They're not like Christ in the sense that he was the perfect Lamb of God, became that sacrifice. They're not the same, but they are antitypes to Christ. They were leaders, they were deliverers who were rejected. And the point of this is Stephen is trying to get them to see that, yes, you're viewing Christ, this Jesus of Nazareth, as a simple man, as a man with no reputation, a man that doesn't really have any significant background, and you're rejecting him, just like your ancestors have rejected God's deliverers before. So essentially, this is really no different. At that time, dealing with the Sadducees and others like them, it was no different than, say, God through those other men, trying to show them that they could be trusted, that they were the leaders that God wanted them to be. So if nobody has come up with anything they wanted to talk about since last week, we're going to pick up in verses 44 through... Yeah, David, go ahead.
What chapter
Acts chapter 7. So we're up to 44 through 47, which is where we're going to pick up here just now.
I'd like to go back.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going through 44.
That's okay.
Okay. Back in verse 42. Nope, never mind.
That's okay. Are we not in agreement that we're on? And don't take this the wrong way, but are we on? Everybody in agreement we're on 44? Or did we want to go back? Who had the mark? I would like to know now, Pete.
There was a point I want to make. It's the next verse.
That's okay. Do we need to read it first? Where's who at? Pete, are you in the same place?
Yeah, well, I had 23 written down.
23?
Yeah. That's where
I don't think. 23? Yeah. That was the page that I flipped past. Thank you. Okay, so we are. We did look at that last week because we talked about that, and that's where we were going to pick up. So let's move past 23 through 27 because that's when, Moses has that engagement. They say, who has made you judge and ruler? So now, verses 28 through 33. Cindy, would you be willing to read that?
Okay. You want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in flames from the burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. What did you say, Phil?
Up to verse 33, please.
When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight, and as he went over to look more closely, he heard the Lord's voice. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals, the place where you're standing is holy ground.
Now, does anybody, just out of curiosity, does anybody understand the significance of this place? Now, where is it that Moses went after he decided to become a vagabond, a sojourner? Where did he end up? What's the land called? And what is Midian? I know you're thinking, why don't you go ahead? Well, okay, so Midian had significance of being a place was where a lot of false worship, a lot of false idolatry and things of that nature took place. And the significance of this being is that this is not holy land at all. But that particular location where Moses has this interaction is considered holy ground. So in the middle of all this non-holy ground, there's this little spot of holy ground. I think that's significant. Is that what you would like to have said, Tim?
I think so.
Okay.
Is Madian different than Midian? The translation that I have in verse 29 says the land of Madian, M-A-D-I-A-N. Like you saying I thought Midian. Anybody have any?
Madian.
M-A-D-I-A-N.
I haven't even heard that.
Anybody else?
Oh, okay. Well, King James then, right? Yeah. Well, we know that sometimes the words are different. That's weird, though. I mean, I've been using the New King James for a long time, so I hadn't even noticed that. But no, I'm assuming they're the same place.
I think verse 28 is interesting. How do you know? Can't get away from things that happen.
That's true, yeah. Was my mom always said, well, no, now, you're laughing already. You don't even know what she said. But, I've heard, just be sure, your sins will find you out, which I think the Bible kind of suggests. But my mom always said, you remember who you are. And always what that meant was, we know a lot of people. And that means no matter where you are, they're going to know what you're doing. And I've talked about that before. It's kind of funny, but my mom always seemed to, she wasn't lying. She always seemed to know that we were up to something that we weren't supposed to be.
What I was going to say was that wherever God is holy.
I would, okay.
He changes. He changes very. It's like he changes the laws of physics. Because when the prophets of Baal, when they offered their sacrifice, they couldn't get fire. And God's prophet,
Elijah.
He laid his sacrifice, and then God had him drown it with water. Under ordinary circumstances, it wouldn't burn. You couldn't even get the smoke. burn. It can burn hot. Wherever God is, wherever He reveals Himself to His people, is holy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the fact that He can do those things proves that He is holy, because by definition He is above everything. That He's beyond, regular things like us. I mean, we are created, so we may have difficulty understanding that completely, but absolutely, wherever God is, there's power there. There's a presence that cannot be explained sometimes. But imagine, don't we imagine when we go to read this story of Moses and what happens there, we imagine ourselves in that position. And I say, I imagine I would respond a similar way, if not the exact same way. I mean, to have this place that's of no significance to Moses, and then all of a sudden this bush appears to be or is on fire, but it's not being consumed. And a voice comes from that bush. He knew that this was not just, him hallucinating.
When you asked me, the first thought was going through my head at that point was that His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts are higher than our ways.
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, why the bush? I don't know. Probably no reason at all. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. But now there's one commentator points out that some translations will use the phrase "a voice of the Lord," but should be translated "the voice of the Lord," and I think that's certainly more appropriate if that is, since that is the accurate translation. Okay, other than that, there's not much. Does anybody have any other thoughts there up to verse 33? Yeah.
So you're talking about verse 31 where it says the voice of the Lord?
Yes.
Is it a voice sometimes? Well, so I think it's weird because it says, back in Exodus, my translation, it says, the angel of the Lord appeared.
Yes.
Which I was believed to be Christ. But in this, it says, an angel appeared, and an angel being a created being. So I'm wondering if, not that Christ is a created being, but that maybe can angel be translated as just messenger as well, or?
Yeah, so in the Septuagint, which is the Hebrew to Greek translation, the Greek word for angel is angelos, which also is messenger or speaker or orator or anything along those lines. It absolutely refers to, and many times in the New Testament, what you see in the English is apostle or something like that, or preacher or whatever, but it might not be that in the Greek. It might be angelos, it might be evangelizo or something like that. I mean, it just depends. So, am I going to jump on a wagon and say this is the Lord? I don't want to say that, because what the scriptures tell me is that the voice or a voice came from that bush. Do I want to read into that and say that an angel was definitely there? One translation says it, another translation does not. I want to be very careful, and it should be the voice, not angel.
One translation says what?
I'm sorry?
You said one translation says.
It might. What I'm saying is it might say this somewhere, and it might say something else somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my question is, because in Exodus, the voice identifies itself as the voice of God, who else could it be other than Christ or the Spirit?
Well, if it's referring, it's an assumption that's made that it's the voice of the Lord, but cannot the voice of the Lord also be from the voice of the mouth of a prophet?
The focal point is that it's God instructing Moses, talking to Moses.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that.
That's the focal point.
Yes, Chef?
Yeah, regarding the Midian versus Madian, everything I'm finding when you look at Madian, it immediately refers to Midian, and some suggest that Madian was the Aramaic, and that's not necessarily where the translators are going when they're describing it in English, but that Madian was the Aramaic form.
Okay.
So,
Anything else on that? The voice of the Lord or the angel of the Lord? I wasn't trying to confuse anybody.
It just seems like, 24, 25, it's talking about Moses
he wanted to do something. Apparently he had some kind of a plan, but we don't know what that was. But it wasn't God's time.
Right.
He's a relatively young man. Not yet. Because when he comes to him later, 80 years old, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it is time, but it's like, but he showed us something we haven't seen before in his discourse here. His defense. It's just something small, but it's like, so Moses, his heart's right, he wants to do the right thing, but it's not according to God's will yet. It's not yet.
Yeah. Not yet. There's a lot of that in there.
Commentary that I have says, in the opinion of some Jewish rabbis, 40 was the age at which a man had grown to maturity. Moses' life is divided into 3 parts. The first 40 years in the palace of Pharaoh, the second 40 years in the desert, and the third 40 years carrying out God's will to deliver his people. Moses began his period of wilderness training after he tried to free the Israelites in a way that God had not chosen. We must be careful to do God's work in God's way, in God's time, and for God's reasons. It had been said that Moses spent 40 years thinking he was somebody, then spent 40 years finding out that he was nobody, and finally spent 40 years finding out what God can do with somebody who is nobody. Now, that is a man's opinion.
Yeah.
But
It's good. Well, I think I definitely think there's something to the whole Moses had a plan thing that wasn't really what God, because you think how he responded with the Egyptian situation and his brethren fighting.
if he didn't think the Israelites needed freeing, he wouldn't have killed the Egyptian person.
Yeah.
I think Tom Miller had mentioned before, I think it was the writing, Josephus, one of the things he's not inspired, okay? So we don't know for 100% everything he says is right, but he claims that, well, I don't know what Tom said, but it's like Moses was a general.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
We knew a lot more about things than what we're told. So whether that's true or not, we
Yeah.
do know that he was, like everybody said, things that he was there. I mean, he was with those people. He didn't do nothing all that.
Right.
40 years.
That's 40 years, a long time to not do anything.
Yeah. So he left the position of authority.
Yeah.
He was groomed, that first 40 years, he was groomed to become Pharaoh.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He was raised in Pharaoh's house, and if you're in a ruler's house, especially if you're considered the son of a ruler, you're considered the heir to the throne. So his training, his education, and anything else that he went through was geared toward the benefit and the control of the country of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
There was a person that, again, this is not inspired, who has considered he would have been a pharaoh named Moses, and he left. He was exiled. Now, was that the same person? We don't know.
No, but now you got me curious.
Part of his name was Moshe, actually, is Israelite, like Yitzhak is Isaac,
Yeah.
Moshe, because there was a famous general in Israel back in the 60s, Moshe Dayan had eye patch. But his name was Moses.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Where did you get that information? Who'd you say it was?
It was on a tape.
Okay.
I'm not sure which one.
Well, if you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah.
I'd like to know. I just am curious.
Well, there's so many pharaohs, but
Yeah.
But part of that Moses' name was Moses. So we don't know if it's the same person. That's what some people have suggested, because it says in the story about him that he left Egypt. He didn't become pharaoh, and the reason would be there were several people that had in.
Well, one of the reasons he may have left Egypt was because he was raised in Pharaoh's home, in Pharaoh's house, but he was still a Hebrew.
Yeah, right. I mean, isn't that what kind of motivated him to leave the house in the first place.
And we can see in the Roman government that you didn't kill a Roman citizen without authority from the Roman government. Paul said when he was tried by Israelites, or not the Israelites, but the Jews, Paul's Roman citizens, he said, I appeal to Caesar. They couldn't do anything further to him because he was a Roman citizen. In much the same way in Egypt. You couldn't kill an Egyptian without the authority of the Egyptian government. Now, here you got Moses, who was Hebrew, and they knew that because he took him out of the river. Everything was okay up until the point where he killed an Egyptian citizen. And at that point, I don't think it was going to be a problem with a Hebrew killing an Egyptian. It was going to be a problem, and Moses knew that. That's why he fled.
Mm-hmm.
But he fled, God, and he was in according to God's plan. God used it to come back 40 years later and rescue his people at the time that it was right. Was it right at the time that Moses killed the Egyptian? I don't think so. I don't think they were prepared for the Egyptians. That's a lot of people leaving, and you've got to have a lot of logistics in place in order to move 2 million plus people. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Just trying to get me, you and Rosemary out of the house.
And you got to run the water, right?
Anything else on that section? Yeah, Chaz?
Well, we know for certain that Moses had something in mind. He may have been partially winging it. We don't really know exactly what was going on, but we can learn from it. We know this. He kills a man. Maybe he could have got away with it because of his position, maybe not. But then when he tries to do something with his brethren, and the guy says, oh, are you going to kill me the way you did that Egyptian? Whatever he had in mind kind of unravels. And I'm reminded of all people, Mike Tyson at one point made the statement. He said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And figuratively, Moses got punched in the mouth. And he abandons his plan totally because it says when he goes to Midian, he doesn't just run over there, he settles. That's where he was going to be. And as a matter of fact, when God reveals himself, as you go along the story, we're all familiar with the fact that, I'm God. And Moses like, okay, you're going to go back to Egypt. Not me, God. No. Anybody but me was sort of his fault because he's abandoned any plans of being anything in Egypt. He's done with it. And I don't know what his plan was exactly or how much it was just on the spur of the moment he had killed that man. The Bible doesn't tell us all that, but we do know that God had a plan that was different from what his was. And when God started putting his in effect, Moses was reluctant. And God lovingly, patiently brought him along. And hopefully he does the same with us when he has other plans rather than ours.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously Moses was not on the right track, but he was sincere.
Something to remember about Moses was he knew where he came from. How can we be sure of that? Because who did they send to nurse him, take care of him? His own mother.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be sure that his mother taught him where he came from, who he was, kept it from public knowledge. But Moses was aware of where he came from, who his people were. And he also was educated and taught, and he witnessed the things that were being done to his people. And Moses, like Chaz said, thought he was ready. But Moses may have been ready, he thought in his mind, but the people weren't ready to leave Egypt yet. And it took another 40 years for that to happen. When the time was right, when Pharaoh wasn't ready to let them go, but God was glorified in that process. If the children of Israel had left when Moses was ready, who would have been glorified? It would have been God, would have been Moses, being the leader and savior of the people. God, another 40 years, and God was glorified. There was no
not sure Moses would have accomplished a lot if he had tried to rescue the people at that time. Perhaps he was just trying to be, well, I am a Hebrew, maybe I can try to be a mediator of some kind, which is exactly what he tried to do in both those situations, really.
And by God doing it, it has left an everlasting impression. People today don't believe that the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea on dry land. Well, they went to the shallow end, they did this, they did that, but scientists are now finding chariot remains at the bottom of the Red Sea. That's pretty hard evidence to say, God didn't do it.
Right.
I don't believe it. It's,
God has a way of doing things that people don't forget. Yeah. Okay. Yes?
I remember a little joke was told by a little boy talking about the Red Sea parting, and the Egyptians and the Israelites were there, and the Israelites go over on dry land. And this particular man says, oh, well, in that part of the Red Sea, there was just a trickle of water. That's not such a big deal. And the boy says, oh, the miracle's different than I thought. And he says, what do you mean? He says, God drowned the Egyptians in a little trickle of water.
Ready to move on? Thank you for your comments. All right, 34 through 37. It's difficult. Michael, will you read that? Michael Brownfield, please. 34 through 37.
I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and am come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee into Egypt. This Moses whom they refused, saying, Who made thee a ruler and judge? The same did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out. After that he shewed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. This is that Moses which said unto the children of Israel, A prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren like unto me. Him shall ye hear.
Thank you. One thing I think is incredible to know, perhaps it's just Stephen being filled with the Holy Spirit, but his knowledge of the Old Testament Scripture is phenomenal. And the way that he pieces it together in such a way, like the structure of this is purposeful. He wants them to understand that God has sent men before to deliver his people, and they were rejected. But that didn't mean that, but also that he didn't just say, okay, you're going to reject them, I'm not going to deliver you. Moses might have been rejected as the deliverer at first, but God still chose him to be the deliverer. Same with Christ. He might have been rejected, but he was still the deliverer. That's one thing I think is interesting. Then, of course, the reference to Deuteronomy chapter 18 about the prophet that was like unto him. You think about Christ. Christ was a prophet, correct? What's something that Christ prophesied regarding? His death. What else?
Fate of the temple.
Fate of the temple. What else? The resurrection. His resurrection or the resurrection? Because it was both, and you know that. Yeah. So he was a prophet. And just as God had promised, thousands of years before, this came to pass. And Stephen, again, is just trying to get these people to see that. Oh, you believe in Moses, you believed in Joseph, you believed in Abraham, you believed in all those guys.
But they now believe that Moses took the children out of Israel out of Egypt. They believe it. Their forefathers didn't. And that's what Stephen is conveying to them, that your forefathers rejected Moses, just like you're rejecting Jesus Christ.
Right.
And Moses prophesied. He said, if you're doing, basically in today's terms, what he's telling them is you're doing the same thing your forefathers did. And you see the reaction that they had. It enraged them to beyond the point of sensibility.
Right.
Well, the same thing happened with Christ when he told them, people kill the prophets before, and not listening to me now. What was their reaction?
Yeah, right. Yeah, they didn't like it. They didn't like being told they were wrong. They didn't like being told that things weren't the way they weren't. It wasn't this pretty picture that they had imagined for themselves. The thing is, it could have been the greatest. It could have continued to be the great nation of Israel. Could have, but their sin got the best of them. One thing that was noted, I find very interesting about, especially about, the leaders at that time, is how wrapped up in these men that they were, especially Moses. Yes, God, through Moses, delivered the children of Israel. Yes, God, through Moses, delivered the 10 Commandments and then the entirety of the law, which you can read about. And yet still they put all that faith just in Moses. Now maybe not necessarily then, but they are certainly now. It's like, well, no, we want to go back to Moses. Moses. But back when it was Moses, it wasn't about Moses, was it? It certainly never has been about God, at least not for the most part. So the Sanhedrin, in a sense, they're blaming Stephen, saying you're blaspheming the name of Moses, or you're blaspheming the name of God, or whatever it might be. But they were actually blaspheming the name of Moses. They were looking at it the wrong way. They were wrong, and that's what Stephen is trying to get them to see. And as Tim pointed out, we'll see in a little while, not today maybe, but their reaction to this is not. I mean, we might say it's very human.
Use very strong language when you refer to those people.
Yeah.
Identify who white sepulchres. They just didn't get it. They refused to.
Yeah. It's hard to decipher sometimes where the ignorance is and where the arrogance is. Because when you see them the way they're so argumentative about the truth being told to them, and then their violence toward the individual speaking the truth, it makes you wonder if it's only ignorance, because it can't be. There's got to be some pride there.
At this point, it's probably not just ignorance. There's a lot of pride involved. We've become so wrapped up in ourselves with pride that we sometimes our thinking is clouded, our eyesight's clouded, and we can't see what's happening around us.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good point, because they didn't see, and there's another point that Stephen makes here with the same words. This reference in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15, this prophet like unto me, a reference by Moses to Christ. Isn't that interesting? That this man that they place so much trust in prophesied of one who would come that has now come, and they're rejecting it. So in a sense, they're rejecting the man that they claim to be following even at this time. Moses prophesied of him, but whatever. Moses could be wrong about some stuff, I guess.
The prophecy of Christ even at one point says, and you shall call his name Jesus.
They should have been familiar.
The bells and lights should have been going off.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Any other comments on that? Not much to discuss beyond, the mentality of the people. They were definitely being hypocritical in this situation.
One more lesson for us to learn today is that we need to be extremely careful, myself being the chief, that we don't get caught up in situations where we can't see what the truth is. That we I don't know what the right word is, that we become so sure of ourselves that we can't see what God is trying to do.
That's important. Moses was, I laugh. It seems like I laugh every time I think about Moses, at first, because, when he first has this confrontation, it's sort of, he's accepting that he's not in a position to do what he really wants to do. But he was all for this, helping his people or whatever. But then when God says, okay, I think it's time, Moses starts making all these excuses, And I'm thinking Moses is very well educated, being raised in the house of Pharaoh. He isn't the way he claims to be, and that is slow of speech and tongue. But that's a tendency of people to make excuses when things aren't going their way, or when there's something required of them that may be too difficult, or at least they believe to be too difficult.
This is just my opinion. Moses is remembering, even though 40 years has passed, Moses is remembering the consequences for that Egyptian's life. If he goes back to Egypt, they're going to require him to pay his life. They haven't forgotten. They know who he is.
Oh yeah, strong chance.
To me, that's what he's afraid of, is that he's going to have to go back. And if he should have remembered, or should have known, that if God's telling him to go back, God's will is going to be accomplished. And it's God's will
That's a big, to me, that's a tremendous, there's a tremendous separation here between these men like Moses and Christ. Because Christ never doubted the mission that he was on. He never had to be encouraged. Yeah. But, you know, these other men, they had to be encouraged. They had to be set straight, but not with Christ.
Moses finally did, after God agreed to give him help and others to go with him. He finally agreed and trusted God.
Mm-hmm. You got to do it before you die. That's a good message for us. Anything else? Okay, John, would you read verses 38 through 40, please?
This is he that was in the church in the wilderness, and the angel which spake to him about Simon,
And with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us, to whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again into Egypt, saying unto Aaron, Make us gods to go before us. For as for Moses, which brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not is become of him. We know not.
Right, yeah. Gotta love the King James sometimes. Or ASV, is that what you're reading? KJV or ASV? King James.
And how long was he on Mount Sinai when they said, we don't know what happened to him?
He was there a while. I guess it depends on who you ask, because I didn't say that. But if you're in, you're in that situation, you're waiting, it always seems like it's way longer than it actually is.
How long it had been since they left Egypt?
Yeah.
Mount Sinai. It took much longer for that than it did for Moses.
At least they were walking. I guess they had their minds on something else, but now they're just standing there at the foot of the mountain, just waiting, twiddling their thumbs.
Maybe their soreness of feet had healed by that time. I don't know.
Maybe. Isn't it interesting that the Church of Christ is mentioned in the Old Testament too? You see that? The church is mentioned? That's a joke, by the way. The congregation of Israel. There's not really much to go on beyond this either. Just pointing out what these people should have already known, the history, and reminding them of what happened with Moses being chosen. God delivered the people, using Moses to do that along the way. Let's see, there is an interesting thing here about these living oracles. Now, somebody tell me what an oracle is. I'm sorry? No. A spoken word or a person who speaks a word. In this case, of course, referring to the men who were, speakers for God, the mouthpieces of God. Living oracles, referring also to the law, which was living. And the law that we're under today is living. Now, a lot of people will argue that it's living in what sense? That if it's living, it can be changed, like the English language, right? But that's not what it means. It just means that it's useful. It's always going to be useful to humanity. Anybody have any comments on that?
It's interesting, verse 40, it says, Make for us gods who will go before us. It seems like they know that what he's making is fabricated, it's made, it's fake, but they still want it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that every time I study this section of Scripture, and not this particular here in Acts, but going back with the Israelites, that is one of those things that confounds me, that they became so impatient with whatever, perhaps they didn't even really fully understand what was happening at the time, but that they had waited long enough to make a golden calf to worship. That one's always confounded me. I'm with you on that one, because it didn't take very long. I mean, God had led them to this place already. But
It seems as though the logical thing, and of course, the logical thing would have been to wait for God, but it seems their logical thing would have just been to do their own thing, but instead they needed something to follow, sheep without a shepherd, right?
right, just wonder why they chose something stationary to follow.
In regards to the word oracle, it really has two definitions.
Right.
Two meanings. One is a person.
Right.
A priest or priest, I think, Tim's very
Yeah, I said that. That it's the word, but it's also the person who speaks the word, or can be. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody who reads fantasy at all will know that that word is used oftentimes for people who can see things, like magical things, like the future or whatever. But it really is, even in those cases, simply somebody who expresses that what they see to somebody else. But if you wanted to, I should have probably just let you, but I wanted you to know I did say that because I didn't want, I don't know everything, but in that case I wanted to make sure.
What Cindy was saying is that, in what you said about was it fantasy world?
Yeah, if you're reading it, not science fiction, fantasy.
In that situation, like in comic books and things like that, we refer to as superheroes, but I guess another term you can apply would be a godlike figure or something that people are enthralled with into worship.
Mm-hmm.
It can have, I guess what I'm saying is it can have a negative connotation as well as religious. Religious isn't the right word, but it can have a positive and a negative connotation.
I think that's the second bell, isn't it? Okay, well, thank you for reading and for your comments.